So, hello everyone. Добрый день. Welcome to this guest talk hosted by our institute and the project on language contact and literature, and also co-hosted by the East Center at the University of East Anglia. We are delighted to welcome here Miriam Finkelstein. Miriam is professor of Slavic literatures and literary theory at the University of Constance in Germany, or should I say Switzerland? Not Germany.
No, it's Germany.
Her main research areas these days revolve around global Russophone literatures with a special interest in poetry, but she's also published extensively on translingual and multilingual literatures in and from Eastern Europe, Jewish Russians, or Russian Jewish rather, literature, and currently she's completing her second book about memory and history narratives in recent Russian-American and Russian-German fiction. And I should probably add that when this project started, a project on language contact and literature started, Miriam was one of the very first people we invited and wanted to come here. And it's taken a while because we kept making a date and then something would come up, and we're so happy that you finally materialized here, and we're
in the flesh.
Absolutely, and we're
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eugenia, for inviting me. I know it's taken a while, but it worked out finally. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very pleased and very honored to be here to speak to you about what is my most recent research, basically. Is it okay like this? Yeah? This is so, okay. In terms of a very brief introduction, this is an ongoing research. I published my first article on this earlier this year. So I will just present some preliminary ideas and hypotheses I have on this issue of multilingualism and the poetics of memory in recent Russophone poetry. So my presentation will consist of 3 parts. In the first part, I will address my theoretical framework about the current efforts of decentering and globalizing Russian studies. I will speak in the second part about the forms and functions of literary bi- and multilingualism, the way I see them as of today. And finally, in the third part, I will address the main issue of today's speech, mother tongues, multilingualism, and the poetics of memory. In particular, what function mothers' languages have, what role they play in Russophone, in contemporary Russophone poetry. So just to give you an idea what the field discusses today, that field that was formerly known as Russian studies or Russian literature. So ever since 2018, 2019, we have seen increasingly, we have seen efforts to open up discussions of Russian cultures, literatures and cultures outside of Russia proper, connected to the question of how to theorize and how to discuss them, how to decenter the field, and for the field to become more inclusive of the literature written outside of Russia proper, in the so-called diaspora, in the countries of the former Soviet Union. So here are a couple of examples. One of the very first volumes was the Global Russian Cultures, edited by Kevin Platt, in which I had the honor to participate. Was kind of first effort to speak about the global distribution of Russian language literature, and also including music and other issues. We have publications by our British colleagues, Transnational Russian Studies, that was edited by Andy Byford and other colleagues. So already before the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, we have seen this understanding of the necessity to revise the field, to look for new approaches and new ways to research it outside, to delineate the culture and the literature from the country itself. Also, very, very interesting effort was, does it work? Yeah, I hope it does. Fluid Russia by Vera Michlin, that, for instance, it's one example, but I think a very good one of how transnational and global tendencies has affected Russian literature. One of my favorite concepts, and one concept I find particularly appealing, was presented by Maria Rubins, a colleague from London, who presented a concept or the idea of an archipelago of Russian cultures, or in other words, a polycentric conception of Russian cultures. This is a very short quotations. The archipelago is a trope for extraterritorial Russian culture, suggests exchange, multiplicity, and fluidity, open to cross-cultural exchanges, and she speaks of it. So the idea is to look at the Russian language cultures as a kind of archipelago that consists of different islands, which is a decentral formation that has no one political or cultural center that has the power to dictate anything to others. And there are all these different islands across the world. So, and this is why she says they're open to cross-cultural exchanges. Hybrid island identities are in flux and subject to continuous redefinition. And just as the totality of an archipelago is constituted by the articulation of each of its islands, so global Russian culture can be represented as a dynamic totality of all these interconnected centers, right? So to make it more precise, maybe such centers would be Germany, for instance, where we have a huge, Austria as well, huge Russian-speaking communities. It would be Israel, obviously, the United States and Canada goes without speaking, and so on. So these would be all these interconnected islands. And this term, just to show you very briefly how successful this term was, it was only, this is just a small note, recently used in a theatrical festival that took place a couple of weeks earlier in Berlin, the so-called Voices Festival, where the superintendent of that festival, Marina Davidova, also referred to this trope of an archipelago of nowadays diasporic Russian cultures. So it appears that this idea of an archipelago is currently gaining momentum. Obviously, this archipelago model and the other model I will talk about in a second are directed against official Russian policies and are devised as a countermeasure and a counter concept to what we know of as the soft power Russian policies of the so-called Russian world. I'm showing, I'm very proud of this slide. This is historical. I took this many years ago when it was still online. And what the Russian text says here, I'm very happy that I kept here because this is really telling. As it was formulated, I think I took it like 5 years ago. The central aims of the fund are the popularization of the Russian language, which is the national property of the state of Russia. This is the language is a property of the country. And obviously, if you read it further, and it has, so the fund is meant to promote the language globally, but obviously on its own terms. Now, the current, just to give you an idea how much, this is the English translation of the page's current form. They, for whatever reason, deleted or omitted that formulation of property. But the historical idea, I hope is clear. The concept that is probably of the greatest importance for me and my work, one I'm heavily engaged is that of Russophonia, a term coined and proposed by my colleague Naomi Kafi from Portland, from Reed College, who first came up with this term more than 10 years ago, I think it is now, in her dissertation that was published in 2013, and she has published widely on this issue. And she was basing her ideas, and I think it's pretty clear, on other comparable concepts such as Anglophone and Francophone and Sinophone cultures and languages. And just to give you an idea of what she was looking to do, so at the very beginning, she says, taking a cue from post-colonial literary studies, especially from the disciplines of Francophone and Sinophone studies, I propose the term Russophone to describe literature written in the Russian language, and Russophonia to describe the totality of social, linguistic, and geopolitical environments in which Russian-speaking authors write and live, end quote. A necessary addition to this is what she writes further down in saying, I propose Russophone literature as an accurate and necessary classification for works that are too often, and this is the point, too often dismissed as peripheral, or at best awkwardly shoehorned into the existing Russian canon. Bless you. I further argue that Russophone studies as a potential field of academic inquiry would provide the space for understanding realities outside of an imperial center and identities beyond a traditional understanding of nationality, end quote. Just to clarify, at no time because this question was raised many times, this is definitely not to exclude Russia proper. This is to expand the field, to be more inclusive also towards minoritarian writing in Russia itself, writing by the peoples of the North, for instance, the Russian North, Siberia, and so on. And obviously, being more inclusive of first and also second generation writers in global contexts. Just a very short notice, this term Russophone, this question was sometimes posed to her and others. So why is it necessary if we in the Russian language, we already had a similar term, ruskojazyčnej? Why this? The point here is that the term ruskojazyčnej, particularly in the Soviet context, was often used as a derogatory one for people who were not ethnic Russians, but not native speakers of Russian. And this is a new term to be done with this discriminatory and derogatory terms. And the issue I want to bring to this field, which is this last remark on this slide, is that it is my impression that these Russophone texts, this Russophone literature, is often written in more than one language. It is nominally in Russian, but in almost, I would say, 8 out of 9 cases, it will include other languages as well, or references to other languages and cultures. And this is what I will try to speak about in the following minutes. My second part, forms and functions, and here I also have try to group them into 3 groups, actually. And I would like to begin by saying that multilingualism, multilingual literature, and I guess this is it goes without saying that it can present itself in different forms. And one especially important form for me is that of publishing. So multilingual literature often takes on different forms and shapes, and sometimes it is not just the text itself that is bilingual, multilingual, but the forms of publication. Let me show 2 examples I would like to speak about today. The first one comes from Latvia, and this is the group of poets and publishers called Arbita. They are based in the capital city. Simeon Khanin, this is the gentleman with the curly hair in the front. Artur Spunte, the gentleman behind him, Sergei Timofeyev and Vladimir Svetlov. I did not include this is the dates of birth. They are what we can maybe say the last Soviet generation. People born in the late 60s, early 70s, maybe even mid 70s, who were experienced the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but basically came to be poets in that time and later. All of them are fluent in both Russian and Latvian, but make a conscious decision for Russian as their poetic language. They came up next to their writing. They also publish their own books. The publishing house was founded almost 20 years ago. And back then already it was intended to counterbalance the power of the Russian press, of the Russian publishing industry, to have their own publishing avenue. As you can see, what they emphasize in these books, on the cover, in the way these books are manufactured, is this coexistence, the perpetual coexistence of the two languages, of the Latvian and the Russian. So you have on the left a volume of short stories called Prose in both Latin and Cyrillic. Artos Punte poetry collection was published in two languages. Stereo by Sergei Timofeyev, the title speaks for itself. It's simultaneously in both languages. And a particularly nice example, one I brought with you, is the collection of poems by Semyon Khanin that consists of two books. I'm not sure our guests online can see this. One is in Latvian, one is in Russian. They are connected, held together on their back by a magnet. You can separate them. You can also feel, I will show you in a second, there is a magnet on the back side. So even, and this is, I think, a very, very clever way to connect them, because even if you were to lose one book, or if you decided to get rid of the other book because you didn't need it, you will always have a tactile memory of this magnet on the side. I will just pass it around for you to see. More recently, this is his this book called Two, was published either earlier this year or last year, not exactly sure. And for this one, he took a step further. This idea of connection between the two national languages. So you also have two books, like in the previous example, but now they are connected. They are literally connected, intertwined, and entangled by these bands. Right. So unless you were, and I think this is also a very clever solution, because now if if anyone had the idea to separate them, you would have to do violence. It would be cutting them apart, would be this very, very violent act. Right. So I will pass this around also for you to see. So these are these possibilities of such bilingual bilingual publishing. And of what it does, in other words, it presents Russian language as intrinsically connected to Latvian. It is a Latvian Russian, not just any other. Another more recent attempt to decentralize the language was undertaken by the Uzbek poet Hamdam Zakirov and our fellow scholar, a post-colonial scholar, Madina Tlastanova, who is currently based in Sweden. This is a so-called non-Russian journal. It's an online publication only. It says «Нерусский журнал на нерусском для нерусских». So it's a non-Russian journal in non-Russian for non-Russians. What it does, and again, here the visual component is of utmost importance. because it is recognizably Cyrillic, but it introduces elements from other alphabets, from other scripts that also use Cyrillic letters like Kazakh, Russian script, and others. So it's recognized, immediately dissented, right? And this is how it works. So they publish basically anything. If you feel like submitting, they published poetry and prose, but also scholarly pieces, accept everything in, as it says here, other non-Russian languages such as Azeri, English, Uzbek, Ukrainian, Finnish, and Estonian. Finnish because Zakirov now lives more than 20 years in Helsinki. So he's a Helsinki-based poet. So in other words, what we see is, to summarize this point, we see more and more attempts to create an infrastructure of publishing for this global Russophonia. And this is, you might ask yourself, so how is this different from, you probably know that since a lot of Russians left Russia out of protest against Putin politics after the beginning of the war, and they have founded numerous new publishing houses, both online and offline. How is this different? This is directed at people, at multilingual non-Russian individuals specifically, right? This is the nature, and it's really exciting to follow this particular development. This is an older example of combining languages in multilingual publications, is something I called ambilingual writing. This is based on Stephen Kellman's terminology. An example of this would be, forgive me, the last book of poems by the Ukrainian poet Iya Kiva, Further Away from Paradise. It was published in Kyiv in 2018. It consists to 90% of Russian texts, but it is also interspersed with the Ukrainian poems, right? There are fewer Ukrainian poems in this than Russian ones, but it's clear, she makes clear that they belong together. Ever since 2022, she changed languages completely and writes in Ukrainian only. As for now, she herself says that this decision may be changed in the future, but for now she's a Ukrainian language poet exclusively. And with this, I come, before I continue to my actual theme of mothers' tongues and mothers' languages, a couple of ideas about the functions of literary multilingualism. And by this, I actually mean text-based multilingualism. We have seen obviously a lot of different definitions. Two I particularly like was suggested back in 1989 in the canonical text, The Empire Writes Back. I think it's still useful. The technique of selective lexical fidelity, which leaves some words untranslated in the text, is a more widely used device for conveying the sense of cultural distinctiveness. And I think until this day, this is what multilingual texts do. They convey this sense of cultural distinctiveness. Another one, a lot more recent, was suggested by Julia Taylor Batty in her 2013 published monograph, Multilingualism in Modernist Fiction, which goes in a little bit into a similar direction in saying multilingualism troubles notions of linguistic, cultural, and national identity and origins through the productive stylization of processes of interlingual interference, mixing, and error. So basically, if you look at these earlier definitions and attempts to understand what it's for, why write one text in more than one language. What I would like to bring to this conversation are two additional ideas. So from how I see it is that multilingual texts always present a challenge and a provocation. Because when people encounter such texts, when I teach them to my students, for instance, the initial instinctive reaction is that of this is too complicated. It's confusing. It irritates people, and this is exactly what it's meant to do, right? It's meant to irritate us. But writing and reading multilingual text is also always a confrontation with the unknown, the forgotten, and the suppressed. And this is what I will show you in a bit. And also, I think my current observation is that these texts often serve as a meta level for reflections on the nature of languages themselves. I have a lot of examples. I won't address all of them. I have so many by now, but maybe to mention a first one. This is Dinara Rasuleva, is a Tatar Russian poet who is now based, for many years now, based in Berlin. She started about 5 years, six years ago, a project called Lost Lingual. I'm sorry, I'm a very bad translator. It's neither elegant nor eloquent, so I beg your forgiveness if the English translations sound funny. But what she says here, and I thought it was a really interesting project. I'm starting to publish texts from the Lost Lingual series. In them, I use the Tatar language to the extent that I know it without using dictionaries, as I did before when trying to translate poem from Russian. This research performance shows how one's native language is replaced by other languages and creates a state of speechlessness. My weak and everyday knowledge of the language makes the text completely different from what I wrote in Russian. They have become short with meanings based on sounds and forms. So this is an attempt to recover, to reclaim the language of one's childhood or youth, and trying to work through this forgotten language and reclaim it for herself. And this project took off a little bit later. She organizes courses for other, mostly for women, with whom she does exactly this, who come together and try by means of creative work, poetic work, to go back to their original languages and try to retrace these forgotten languages that were, and this needs also to be added, that were at some point replaced by Russian. Because for everyone, this was the language of the education, high school and university education. And the first languages were, they kind of went away through this. Two more examples, one by Inna Krasnopir, and again, a Russian Berlin-based poet, and Anwar Duysenbinov, one of the most, I think, exciting Kazakhstani Russophone poets nowadays. Kazakhstan, in my understanding, has probably the most exciting literary sphere nowadays. This is how Krasnopir works. This is her way of working through multilingual texts. I wasn't able, as you see, to translate it completely because I wouldn't know how. This is a question to the specialists of the project. She combines 3 languages, Russian, German, Russian, German, and English. And this is a programmatic text from one of her more recent volumes. I hate the word nation. I will not read it out aloud to you, but what it ends is this with the directionality is important for me in this case, because she ends this with saying the parole, the language, is torn apart. She's taking her Russian, he's taking her languages, and tears them apart to see how they look from the inside and how to put them together in new ways again and reassemble them, rearrange them to become more useful to her purposes or more suitable for her purposes. So this is a direction of pulling things that you could say the analytical direction of putting the language apart. There is a contra direction suggested by Anwar Duysinbinov in his poem Tilech. Now, Tilech is a neologism that consists of both the Russian word reč for speech and til, which is Kazakh for the same thing. So it's speech. It is not itself bilingual, but I will just show you my English translation. In this, he reimagines the way a young boy called Arman, or maybe Islam, grows up in today's Kazakhstan, and bemoans this lack of connection to former generation, to the speakers of Kazakh, who would have been able to teach him the language of his ancestors. The directionality of Duysinbinov is different to Krasnopir in that he is thinking towards maybe even a utopian future. So what he looks to do is to come up with a new language that would combine the two, Kazakh and Russian, and offer people a better future. So what he says, this is what I highlighted here. On the other hand, don't you think that in Tilech, this would be this utopian language of the future, synthetic language of the future, wrapped in a layered shell of two languages and many cultures? There may lie in the pearl of future true tolerance and not just a political slogan. Perhaps Tilech is destined to become a catalyst for a truly mutually beneficial interaction between cultures and worldviews, capable of drawing on the deep human resources of a country suffering from a post-colonial complex in order to build a society that is free, first and foremost, from the rubbish in people's heads, and modern, perhaps even ahead of its time. Again, this is a programmatic plea, a manifesto, an idea of how to devise a language, a synthetic language, while Krasnopir acts analytically. He's working synthetically to create this one. This is not included in my translation, but at the very end of this text in the original, he says, yeah, but you know, this is just me daydreaming. So in how far this can go ahead is questionable. Mother tongues. In what I think is probably the seminal work for our field that was also published in 2012 by Yasemin Yildiz, Beyond the Mother Tongue, the Post-Monolingual Condition. She said something that I made kind of the beginning of my thoughts. Speaking of mothers and language and language transmission from mothers to children, she says, speaking of a historical situation back in the 19th century, Yildiz says, the mother, however, was first instructed in textbooks by male experts in how to produce the sounds properly. Her body was meant to function as a medium for those male experts in their attempt to control the proper reproduction of language. As this scenario strikingly demonstrates, the mother tongue coming out of a woman's mouth was not just any language that a mother spoke, but rather the result of male ventriloquism. And this is, for me, the key idea that this is a ventriloquism. And what I want to do is I want to argue that in contemporary poetry, we see something different. We see an imagination of mothers' tongues that is not or not necessarily based in reality, in true historical situation, but try to reimagine mother's speech as something completely different. For my first example, I will address Aleksandr Averbuch's monolingual monologues, mother's multilingual monologues, from his book, Fourth Person Testimony, Svidetel'stvo четвертого лица, that was published in 2017. The book is organized in 5 cycles. They all cycles in different ways speak of wars in the territory of what is today Ukraine. And the first cycle is called, and this is already a very strange sounding, confusing title, Пока тебя уже нет, or as long as you are not here anymore. So we see how the temporal dimensions shift and fluctuate. Again, it was incredibly difficult to make sense of it in the translation. The cycle consists of 12 letters addressed by a woman of whom we know very little. We don't have her name, we don't have her age, we don't know where she lives. We realize that she is Jewish, and the letters are dated. As you can see, they spend a time frame from 1930 till 1933. So in the interwar period, and she writes these letters apparently to a husband, her husband who left to Palestine and wants her and their children to follow, but she's hesitant. These are fragments. It is a highly fragmentary poetical writing, and it is multilingual in that we see this combination of Russian, German, and in some cases Yiddish. We have Estonian here in other examples, and it is you could maybe say a flow of consciousness. So the written form exactly shows the way she thinks. So this is a, so to say, one-to-one repetition of her thoughts. Just to give you an idea of how it sounds in the original. Мальчик мой родной, вероятно, это письмо дойдет, когда кошки будут зарабатывать себе на тот свет. Wir sind ja noch jung, aber du kannst doch keine Pein. Вчера приехала Элла, und das, was sie erzählte, со слов Мир и пляс, их больница war Hölle auf Erden. Наша Тамарочка в таких случаях говорит, dass ich nicht ertragen kann, не правда ли, and so on and so on. So this is this flow of consciousness that combines in most elemental way the two languages. Maybe one more. No, this I simply was unable to translate. What his texts do in this particular cycle, they keep the memory alive in this bilingual or multilingual writing. This is the memory of a generation of group of people, and particularly of the mother, who was for whom this was normal, for whom this was long before national formation, nation states came to be there in this region. And there are different ideas. Some say that this was meant to be written in Warsaw. Others say she was maybe somewhere in the Ukraine or in Riga, but it doesn't matter. These are, in other words, these are the bloodlands. You know, this is what Timothy Snyder referred to as the bloodlands. And here Averbuch reimagines this region as a genuinely multilingual. By creating this language, this woman who addresses her husband, but also her children in these letters, this is how the world was. This was the normality before Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union tore this world apart. This was the normal, in as far we can speak of normalcy, Jewish world of that interwar period. This is even more complicated, and I simply couldn't come up with any way to translate this. This is already in a year later, 1933, and this is so, this is when things get worse and worse. Poverty is increasing. The political situation obviously gets more and more difficult. It's very difficult to make sense of this text, even for fluent Russian speakers. But this is how it works. Because time is progressing, I will briefly address my second example, Tanya Skarynkina, a Belarusian Minsk-based, Smarhon-based poet who writes poetry in Russian and prose in Belarusian. This is from her book, most recent book, YesMamочка, Yes Mummy, that was published in Minsk in 2022. This is, her mother. Again, it's important to see the visual design and the cover. Her mother in different imagination. In the foreword, she writes, this collection consists of 70 poems. And she wrote all of them after her mother passed away. So this is intended to again conserve the memory of her mother and her mother's speech. This is a completely different way of multilingualism. So this is the opening sequence of the book, where she says, I walk forward through the snow. I see different tracks. I don't see my mother's tracks. My mother was taken away from me. Where is my mother? What is in other words, you could say, what is the legacy of my mother and her speech in all of this? And again, ending here by saying, "У меня забрали маму и сказали не грусти." They took my mom away from me and told me not to be sad. And all this collection is dedicated to the recreation of the mother's voice, and to upholding the memory of the mother. Again, always connected to the question of languages. This is a particularly interesting poem because it shows on a meta level the search, Skarynkina's search for a suitable language. I think it's a hilarious poem in that she says, she has this very particular sense of humor when she says, I bought a collection of autographs of famous artists. After a moment's hesitation, I replaced my scribbles with Tsvetaeva's beaded script. She refers here to Marina Tsvetaeva, the famous poet. And I became a poem. I became a poet. It's a good method. I recommend it. But then something goes wrong. In particular, what goes wrong is that she starts writing in Tsvetaeva's handwriting. She writes letters to her mother, and the mother is shocked by it because she thinks that someone on purpose hurt her daughter and hurt her hand, because this is not hers. This is not her hand. This is not, you could maybe say, not her voice. It ends, and I think this is what it's all about. Я думала, тебя украли, арестовали, велели показать документы, руку нарочно повредили, заставляя выдать своих. I thought you had been kidnapped, arrested, asked to show your documents. They deliberately injured your hand, forcing you to betray your own people. So by changing the handwriting, metaphorically speaking, changing the voice, she betrays her own Belarusian people. She betrays her mother, her family. This is all obviously in the Belarusian context, also a reference to the partisan experience of the Belarusian people during World War II. And here, the bilingual form works in Skarynkina's poems, works like this. Her own speech is always in Russian. Her mother's speech is always in Belarusian. This is what I marked here as yellow. And what it does, this mother's tongue, this mother's Belarusian language, it is a source of creativity. It's not just there, it serves a very particular purpose and it has a very particular function. I spent half the night composing an extraordinary poem, elegant in its simplicity. The second half of the night I spent trying to write it down, to remember in my sleep without writing it down. In the morning, only some pretty fragments lay in different parts of my head. She forgot her poem, it's gone. But what helps her replace it and find it and reformulate it is her mother's native speech, her mother's Belarusian speech. My mother's first phrase in the morning helped me compose a more or less passable replacement, which is perfectly banal. Maria called all upset because of the glass jars, you know, for conserving vegetables, fruits and vegetables. And this is obviously no coincidence. This is about the conservation of a mother's speech, of the mother's language. She is all upset because the jars, now she has to go and buy some because the tomatoes will go bad. And to take it even a step further, mother's speech is creative in that it promotes the poet to invent new words and expressions. For example, this dekabrskost. This word does not exist in Russian. It's a neologism. The feeling of December. I roughly translated this as Decemberliness. This is the mood you have in the month of December. And again, this is always, and this is also, it's a dialogue. It's always a dialogue. It's always an exchange with the mother. And mother's language is key to the poetic imagination, to the development of the poetic language. And 5 more minutes, is it okay? My final example is comes from Ekaterina Sokolova's poems that I called here Mother's Broken Russian. Sokolova is, to my knowledge, still lives in Russia. These are some poems from her 2015 collection, the Chud cookies. Chud is an ethnic group in the Russian, indigenous ethnic group in Russian Northeast. This is the first and opening poem of the collection, which is called Присоединенная территория, annexed territory. And it leaves no doubt about Sokolova's position here. The annexed territory is decorated for the 7th of the month. It is obviously the 7th of November, the celebration of originally of the revolution. Today, reformulated as a celebration of people's unity in Russia. The indigenous population here protests this unity. They do not wish to, this is my reading of the text, they do not want to be a part of this. They hide in their houses, they leave their shoes outside, and do not refuse any participation in this people's unity thing. I will skip this. My final example, Mom said, this is, I don't know, I would love to hear your opinion again on this, whether and if how this is translatable. This is the imagination. This is the poem that originally inspired me to look into this in the first place. How does mother speak? And I would love to read this for you in the original because I don't really know how to, because it is all based on the specific Russian pronunciation of the North, which pronounces the O's as O's, even if they are not stressed, which is not common in standard Russian speech. Мама говорила в Богородске, на кладбище разноцветные кресты, а тут все уродски, серые плиты. Мама говорила в лесочке, швивые грибочки, василечки, ой, фон, покажи мне картинки про Вологодчину. Буду смотреть, вспоминать, стихи про родину писать. It is full of neologisms, such as Shrivi, there is no such word. It's a combination of shrivi, as in lice, which is lazy. I tried to come up with the schlausi, as maybe this is to give you a feeling of how she works. She keeps the writing, the orthography is kept according to the phonetic picture here. So it's not iPhone, it's oiphone. It's kortinka and not, as we would typically say, kartinka. And it ends with her statement, show me the pictures of the city of my birth, of my origin, my motherland, and I will then write poems. So again, this is memory, and the mother's language is intrinsically connected to memory and to creativity. And with this, I would like to summarize some of the functions, key functions I see in this contemporary multilingual, the functions of multilingualism in texts that engage in this conversation about mother languages. I think that multilingualism first and foremost functions as a mnemonic strategy. Mother's languages serve as an archive in which the memories of the 20th centuries are stored, memories of dramatic and tragic histories on and off Russian Soviet borderlands, of colonial violence, war, genocide, and displacement. Mother's multilingual languages also function as a powerful source of poetic creativity and productivity for their descendants. And lastly, insofar as multilingual literature questions and undermines nationally conceived linguistic unity and normativity, multilingualism also functions as an innovative and efficient means of resistance to national chauvinistic, illiberal, and anti-democratic political tendencies. Thank you very much.